IVM.
Hi everybody, just wanted to ask everyone for a quick favor. We're running a brand survey right now and would really appreciate it if you could let us know what you think about the advertising on IVM. Go to ivmpodcast.com/survey and do let us know. As part of this, we'll be selecting 10 random participants and sending them some IVM swag, so do fill out those surveys.
I wake up pretty early. All cyclists need to wake up early, right? There's a golden period where we can ride. After that, there's just too much traffic out there. I woke up early. I think I was up at 5. I was going to head out for a bike ride. And it was pouring. When I'm saying pouring in Bombay, it was really pouring. So I looked at it. I looked at my bike because there's also a whole ritual. Running that way is much simpler. With cycling, there's a whole ritual that gets added on because you got to clean the bike, etc., etc. So I'm looking at it and I was like, okay, maybe it's not making much sense, So I gave myself some time. I chilled. I had coffee. And then finally, much later, which is not the right time, maybe at 8 or something, I'm like, no, but I should. I was like, maybe I will get a short ride in. I know I'll feel so much better. And it was. Like, I remember, I came back from that ride so refreshed in my head.
Hello and welcome to the Filter Koffee Podcast. My guest today is Avinash Pant, who is the head of marketing in India for Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. Avinash has a stellar marketing career that spans over 2 decades, where he has worked with some of the greatest brands ever built in this world, like Coca-Cola, Nike, Disney, and Red Bull. He's also led some of the more memorable campaigns in India for these brands on his watch. I'm personally a very big fan of the work Avinash did at Coke and then later at Nike. And we'll speak a lot about these in the episode. Avinash also has a passion for sports and the outdoors in his personal life as a cyclist, a runner, and many other things. He's probably one of the few CMOs I know who takes fitness that seriously. So it's almost a way of life more than anything else. I want to speak to him about that and how he finds the gas in the tank to be able to do that. But mostly, I want to speak to Avinash about what brand Facebook means for a country like India and the concept of social media communities themselves. This is the Filter Koffee Podcast, and we'll be right back after this very short break. Stay with us.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Cyrus Says, Chunky Pandey brings the nostalgia for the 90s while sharing his journey as an actor. We'd like to welcome Audiogan to the network. It's an old show about design. We want to kick off this season with Jay Datta, design head at Make My Trip and Go Ivy Bo. He's also the founder of Design Up. On The Habit Coach, get to know more about human mind and curiosity. On This Round is On Me, we dive deep into the electric vehicles and what the cars of the future are going to look like. On The Wire Talks, a fascinating conversation on why the poet Kabir is not only significant but relevant to our times. And on Advertising is Dead, let's understand internet culture, meme marketing, and lots more. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any other show for that matter, please do tell a friend. Word of mouth is the best way to spread the word about a podcast you love. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week: Seat, Cred, Global Victoria, Bank of Baroda, Intuit India, and CoinSwitch Kuber.
Welcome to the Filter Koffee Podcast, Avinash. When people talk about you in marketing circles, there is always this aura of, hey, Avinash is one of the fittest CMOs in the country. And that's obvious given, your love for sports and the outdoors. But I wanted to start the episode by asking you, especially from the perspective of the last year and a year and a half, in terms of what you were able to and unable to do.
Yeah, 2020 has been, I think it's been a bit of a surreal year for me. And actually I'll go a few years back, to be honest. 2020 was that promised year, Karthik, if you'll remember. For any of those who've been in work life for decades, there was always this idea that used to build plans for 2020, right? By 2020 will be this. By 2020, the world would have changed. Little did we know, is what I would say now. And for me, it was a year of many firsts, right? So I joined Facebook in 2020. Of course, we also had to and are still dealing with the pandemic in 2020. So why I say surreal is because I was super, super excited about this new job. And I think my bags were packed. I was supposed to fly into the US to start my day one. And literally, I think, literally the day before I was to fly out, right, is when all of this happened, right? It's like, okay, don't travel, something's happening. This is early March, of 2020. So it's been surreal because this has been Facebook for me, right? This corner of my house all through, right? All through since last year. So that's on the work front. And even on the personal front, as you touched upon, I don't know about being fit, but the fact that being outdoors, being highly sporty, and really that being a really important part of my life. And I think literally the year started with a lockdown, which was so severe that in my building, we couldn't even step down to walk. Now we find that even that seems to be like a long time back, but we were literally living that reality. And I remember for me, it manifested in running a 5K inside my Matchbox apartment in Mumbai, which really was like the height of desperation, if anything. So, and obviously, I say this from a great position of privilege, right? That we've been hugely lucky in the sense that we're not been fighting for basics, but just the idea that obviously we've dealt with a lot, to be honest. But if I look at the positive side, and that is how I am as a person, a lot of what we could achieve, I would have never believed was possible. So for me to join a new company, to work with teams, agency partners, put campaigns out. I mean, I remember we put campaigns out during lockdown, which also meant strict lockdown because we were very strict with our procedures. So it was literally choosing an actor who's able to shoot himself at his place, like literally things like that last year. So, and then on and on and on, where it's been a way of life and we are actually being able to do quite a bit to also tell us that this is possible, right? We would have never imagined that this could be possible. So in that sense, it's been surreal. I think for myself, since you talked about how fitness, and I guess, I struggle with that word. It's just that I've always been into sports as a person, always, all my life. I wanted to be a soccer player when I was growing up, and I couldn't be one, but I make do with just playing soccer every day, irrespective of my age. So obviously that stopped. But I was able to use the time in a way to, because we were not traveling as much anymore, we were not commuting as much anymore. So the little extra time one got, I think I definitely did get fitter as well, which is not bad, like in terms of just from a personal journey perspective. So yeah, I think it's a bit of a mixed bag, but I tend to look at the positives, and from that lens, I feel, just the possibilities, unless you're pushed and you realize you're in a situation, you would never imagine what is possible. I think that's something I believe, and I keep seeing that happen.
You said 5K in your apartment, and I'm still stuck there in my head. I live with a 4-year-old, and a 5K in my house will be like more like a steeplechase than any reasonable cardio. So now that we are in a post-lockdown phase, Avinash, I can see that you're exploring the outdoors again. I recently saw on your Instagram feed that you had done a cycling ride from Bombay to Pune, which is amazing. When was this? And tell us more about the experience. Was it during the monsoon?
Yeah, it was literally this weekend, Karthik. Literally this last weekend. It's something I've been wanting to do for a while. I think it's connected to what you were saying earlier, right? And what I was saying, just, what is possible or what people sometimes think of as being ridiculous. I think I've been a cyclist for now 15, 16 years. And it's an incredible thing. I've been a massive believer in the sport. I kind of feel I discovered the sport a bit too late. It's like how you discover something which you think, oh, I was actually well designed for it. But you discover it much later in life. Cycling is like that for me. I discovered it in the US. I had been wanting to do an intercity ride over a weekend. I've done longer ones, but literally over a weekend. And I had this idea, actually inspired by the Bombay Pune race. I don't know if you've heard of it. Like even in India, which is not really cycling doesn't have a very big history here, but there is actually a legendary race, the race that has always happened in India, which was the Bombay to Pune race. So. Wow. In a way, that was my inspiration. It's not happened in the last few years, but it used to happen quite regularly. And back in the day when I was not a cyclist, it used to blow my mind, right? The idea that you could race from Bombay to Pune. And again, if you think about bike racing and, if you follow pro tours and stuff, that, these distances are nothing from a respect of of pro cycling.
Sorry to interrupt you, but is this a controlled environment race with traffic stops, or you're just doing this as a...
No. So I'm saying that was my inspiration is that race. We
Oh.
were just a bunch of friends just going, just heading out, literally. That's all.
No, I mean the race only. When it happens, is it a...
I haven't seen it myself. I doubt it highly. By the way, I doubt it highly because over 180 kilometer distance, you can't really control the environment as much,
Yeah.
I would imagine. But anyways, that was just like a back of the head inspiration. But the idea was, push yourself because the Bombay to Pune piece is significant in the sense that you also climb Borghat, which is a pretty tough climb. So you do climb a mountain as well in doing of it. So that's what makes it hard. Otherwise, the distance of 125, 150 is not inconceivable. It's quite possible. But I think what was great is to find friends who were up for it the instant I proposed. I think a week back or 2 weeks back, I proposed this idea. We locked on the date, and then 6 of us just went for it, and it was just quite amazing, to be honest, because it rained all through. It just did not stop, which I love, by the way. It keeps the child in me alive. People always tell me, I've been bike commuting for years in India, in Gurgaon, in Bangalore, in Bombay. I've gone to office by bike for forever now. And people always say, hey, but what about the monsoons? And I'm like, no, I look forward to the monsoons. You know how beautiful it is to ride in the rain. So I think I'm a bit weird that way, is all I think.
It's beautiful, actually. I wanted to ask you this. You've been a marketer all your career, and there is this misconception that marketing is such an all-consuming profession and a career, which is so volatile, and it's this high-pressure, crazy ecosystem with long working hours, which makes it almost impossible to do anything parallelly, right? Of course, there is a lot of truth to this. I have been a marketer for the last 10 years myself, but I found the time to take my fitness fairly seriously. But you have been one of those standout exceptions, right? With just the sheer number of things you're able to do. Tell us a bit more about what your regimen is like.
It's interesting, right? I feel this is a question I'm often asked, and it's been a theme for me, all through my life, to be honest. In fact, let me relate an anecdote, because often when you talk to people and you talk about sport, let's say in the context of interviews, right? I used to work at Nike, and I would interview people. And obviously, if you're a Nike, you'd ask people about sport, right? Like, what's their passion for sport? And one of the things you'd always hear from people, oh, I used to play a lot when I was in college. But then, I started work. And then once I got married, I had a kid. You know how it is. And I would just look them dead in the eye. And I was like, actually, I don't. I really don't. And I played 3 sports when I was literally back in school and in college. Let's say in college, I played 3 sports. So soccer has just been a lifelong love of mine. Volleyball and basketball. These are the 3 sports I played for my college. It was an engineering college, so I'm not saying this was at any level of competence, right? I'm just saying with great passion, these are the 3 sports I played. And what I'm happy to say is even today in my advanced age, I play all 3 of these even now, so now because of the pandemic, it was affected, but now our courts are opening up downstairs. I chose a place in Bombay where I have access. We have a soccer turf in the building. So we literally have a soccer game every morning. And we have, in the evenings, we have the avenue between basketball and volleyball. And mind you, this is good volleyball. This is spike block volley, not the other kind. And so I'm kind of lucky that I have found a group as well. There is an active community around. And so that's been important to me. I think the regimen piece came more from endurance sports, which I got into also quite a while ago. By the way, I was fascinated by this sport called a triathlon, which I discovered. And I remember this very clearly. In 2005, on a highlight on DD Sports, I saw, I think, which must have been a clip from Ironman. And I was like, this is incredible. I have to try this. I used to think of myself as a pretty fit guy back then. And as luck would have it, work took me to the US, and I went to take part in a small triathlon and realized how unfit I am and how much one needs to train, which is what I started to do. So yeah, my regimen, if you have to call it that, though I'm not that organized, is probably about 3 times a week I bike. And like if it's a good week, then probably 3 times a week I probably run or I spread it out. Swimming has completely stopped over the last year and a half. There's no access to a pool anymore. So that isn't happening. And then sports whenever I get the opportunity. Right now, again, that's been a slow thing over the last year and a half. But for me, I don't see it as a very active training plan that I need to follow, but it's much more a way to center myself. And I think that's probably what you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
I find that even in the hardest of days, it allows me to sort my head out. For the longest of time, any of us who've been runners have known that, right? The beauty of the run and slightly longer distances, right? As you start to run or the runner's high. But even more than that, I find that, you get to this place where if you don't get that morning workout in, you're just not as well centered, right? It's almost something is kind of out of balance. And I remember there were days in Bangalore when I used to work there that sometimes I go for a lunch run. If I didn't do one in the morning, but Bangalore is like that, right? You could run during lunch. Our office was next to Alsur Lake. I used to run a few rounds. Incidentally, I've done a running meeting, by the way, which I think is like an incredible idea, where one of my team members said, I want to join you for the run when you go off for lunch. And I said, that's great. Let's cancel the 3 o'clock meeting we have and let's talk during the run.
Right.
And, so I kept the pace a bit easy so we could talk for the first lap. And once we had sorted whatever we wanted to discuss, we upped the pace. I think that day was his first 10K. He was a fit, again, he was a team member of mine, he was a fit soccer player, but wasn't a runner. He ran his first under 1 hour 10K and we got a meeting done. So it's like, even I was like, oh, this is great. This is the first running meeting I've done. But yeah, so it's not so much a regimen, but a way to keep myself centered, to clear my thoughts often, ideas so very often, right? When you're trying to sort something out. And I say this about cycling as well. I truly feel it's like yoga on wheels. That's what it is.
As you're narrating this incident, I have this fear in my mind that you're going to call for a pitch, which is while you're running. So different agencies join you for different laps and sort of present their ideas to
you. No.
Yeah. No, but the thing that I struggle with the most, right, is to separate the mind from the body on this, right? Like today is a great example. It was raining yesterday in Delhi, and as you know, Delhi is probably the best city, I would say, in India to sort of run, especially given the amount of parks and reserve forests you have. And I genuinely wanted to get there, but and then I got up at 5:30. I'm getting ready, but I had this list of to-do things in my head, and I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to enjoy this run much. By the way, I need to clarify. I'm more of a 3K to 5K sort of a guy. I don't like the long distances that you do. And then I gave into it. I said, like, you know what? Let me finish this. And then maybe I can try something in the evening, sort of thing. Do these occur to you? How do you sort of these questions in your head?
No, this is so great because this happened to me last week, by the way, exactly what you said. And I call this the, what excuses did you get over today, right? Like it's one of this happened to me last week. I'm pretty motivated when it comes to getting out of the door because I know it always makes me happy. But exactly what you're saying, this happened to me last week. And again, if you see my Instagram, it's one of the stories where I wake up pretty early. All cyclists need to wake up early, right? There's a golden period where we can ride. After that, there's just too much traffic out there. I woke up early. I think I was up at 5. I was going to head out for a bike ride and it was pouring. When I'm saying pouring in Bombay, it was really pouring. So I looked at it. I looked at my bike because there's also a whole ritual. Running that way is much simpler. With cycling, there's a whole ritual that gets added on because you got to clean the bike, etc., etc. So I'm looking at it and I was like, okay, maybe it's not making much sense, So I gave myself some time. I chilled. I had coffee. And then finally, much later, which is not the right time, maybe at 8 or something, I'm like, no, but I should. Exactly to your point. I was like, maybe I will get a short ride in. I know I'll feel so much better. And it was like, I remember, I came back from that ride so refreshed in my head. And I kind of look at it as, what excuse did you get over? I think the only point, though, of course, I have to say this because I'm into endurance sports and enough people in endurance sports sometimes overdo it. Because just the distances and the length of training can be quite massive as well. So I don't do it from a lens of overdoing it, but I would always try, even an excuse, not an excuse, but the idea that if you haven't got much sleep, right, you were working till late, you had calls late in the night and you're like, okay, I haven't slept enough. I'd actually still try and do my morning workout and see if I can get a 10-minute nap. I cat nap really well and that refreshes me really well. I'm lucky that way that I sleep quite well. But yeah, for me, I don't think for me motivation has ever been the issue. I'm that enthu cutlet, right? So even in your, even in your cycling or running groups or sports teams, I'm the person who people will count on to just push, right? Let's get this done. Similar to that Bombay Pune plan that you were talking about, which I kind of put in place, which we had so much fun on, to be honest.
And having a crew sort of helps for these things, right? Whether it is football or cycling or running. How much would you attribute to that, having a...
Yeah, no, I think it's a balance. Honestly, it depends. So for team sports, oh, for sure, absolutely, no question about it. And I've been in team sports my whole life. Having a crew also is important in some sports, even from a safety perspective, right? Like when we play, if I play with my teenage son and his friends, it's a whole different kind of game. When I play with my buddies, we know that we also have a job to go to right after, right? So you're not killing yourself on that pitch in terms of just how aggressive you are, how safe you are, and things like that. But I also feel there's also time to yourself. Like running, it can be a wonderful solitary sport as well. I think the benefit of community comes more from regularity, also, getting better. Like I think that's a great one, right? You're a cyclist, go with someone who's stronger than you. You'll actually pick up so much. You'll also be able to do paces that you didn't think possible. And I had some of those experiences over the lockdown where in my own community, actually a lot of people have picked up cycling now. In fact, cycling has come up massively around all of us, as you must have seen. And now we have like a very strong crew here as well. So yes, I have the pleasure of the company as well. And sometimes I choose to go alone. I think the interesting thing there is, again, on the significance of community is also around safety. I have this fabulous anecdote where I go for long rides. And when we came into Bombay from Bangalore, I think there was one week where my wife said, this is very disturbing for me that you're out like at 4 a.m., 4:30 a.m. in the morning on the highway. I don't think this is on. Like, I won't even know if something happens to you. And the only way I could address that, and this is interesting because of where I work now, was I put up a post on Facebook. Because how do I find other crazies like me? Right? In a city which I've just come back into. I mean, I'd lived in Bombay many, many years ago, but cycling wasn't really popular then. And I remember, someone responded, there's a group in Powai, immediately responded. And literally that weekend, I could join them for a ride, And that's how I latched onto a community that allowed for that safety. In fact, that's how I started doing the long rides around Bombay, because I had the safety of a community to kind of go with, which I think is so interesting when you even talk about our platforms. And I know we'll talk about that later, but just the idea that how do I get in touch with others like me? And then when they added me to a WhatsApp group, I actually had a group, right? So then everything from, sorting things out, questions around the bikes, what routes are we going? How do you kind of communicate? Again, coming back to your point, right? Having a group, having a tribe becomes super, super meaningful. So yeah, but I think both parts exist. I love running on my own, for example. I really do, because it's completely in my control. I sometimes do that between meetings, to your point, right? You've had a long day. You couldn't do morning, like you said. And then I have meetings in the evening, and I have this 35 minutes in between. I'm going to get a quick run in, and I know I'll be so much better for it, right? So to that extent, it can be solitary.
And from that perspective, the lockdown has been, or rather the work from home culture has been amazing, isn't it? You can do a lot of things like this and come back and have a shower and then get back to the next meeting or the next deck, so to say, right? So that's been awesome. I'm going to take your Facebook example as a segue to move on to another part of this conversation, which is, as I was preparing for our conversation, I was just thinking, I think the year was 2010. And this is when Facebook opened its office in Hyderabad. Kirtika was the director then, and I was working at Nielsen at that point, and a very important partner to Facebook from those days. And I think the other person that I remember now was Rishi, who used to be with Pepsi, Rishi Dogra. I don't know these three people. I'm sure there were many others in that meeting, and this was in Hyderabad in a hotel, which I forget. And then Kritika put up this slide which said, "We are open for business in India." Right? And that was about I think 8 to 10 million people on in Facebook back then. And then since then, it's changed so much. And today, when I look at it, about 450 million people of which about half of them show up every day on the platform. What, in your opinion, does this brand Facebook stand for today?
No, I think it's, I mean, first of all, just commenting on what you're saying, right? Like, and it's beautiful that you're able to kind of connect back right to the beginning of this journey and just the sheer scale and the potential for impact, right? So I just want to kind of touch on that as well, since you're talking about my own
Yeah,
journey
yeah,
and why I found this to be such an exciting proposition to have any role to play in the storytelling of platforms that actually have such a meaningful impact on our own lives, right? I think that was my connection points to what I was telling you earlier as well, right? Even for me in my own journey, whenever I've looked at these platforms and the meaning they have, and I think that's what we always say about when we say that, we are deeply enmeshed in the social fabric of the country. That's truly, and very humbly so, but that's truly what we feel, we believe, we see that around us, right? I mean, you just talked about it from the sense of numbers. And I think for us, there are many facets to this, Karthik, right? So when you talk about Facebook as a company, then it's really in truly being an ally for India in its socioeconomic, growth. And I think that's something we deeply believe. In fact, we created a virtual event last year, which is Facebook Fuel for India, which is really to bring alive these stories of what we see around us, which actually really brings in us the pride and the focus to say, yes, how much more and what more can we do, right? So that's really us as a company. But I think there it's, as a brand marketing guy, I can also slice that by the apps as brands themselves in and of themselves. And, when you just spoke about the numbers and you look at Facebook, which is obviously sizable and meaningful. And to your question, right, for us, it's really about community. Our central belief, both as a company and specifically as Facebook app, is really around the fact that, people are each other's best resources, right? That's what we say. That's what we believe. Or the very idea that you can do more together than alone. Um, I think that was my connection point as well when I was giving you my cycling example, right? It's like, where do you reach out, right? How do you reach out and get help from a network of network, right? So it's the scale that it allows for, because yes, your friends, but then the friends of your friends, and further builds out to a much, much larger network. And I think even in the context of the last year and a half, because that's what we started this conversation with, we've seen such incredible potential in how people are reaching out, right? Whether it is to understand something better, whether it is really for help. And we've lived through those situations. We've all lived through those situations in the country over the last year and a half itself, right? Even just in the specific context of the pandemic. And so anyway, so that's the core really of Facebook brand. And I think in connection to that we worked on all the work that we've done on Facebook, with our More Together campaign, is really bringing that out, bringing those stories to life, bringing the stories that we are seeing around that inspire us, and making that happen. And I can elaborate on that as well in a bit. When you look at Instagram, and it's such an incredible platform. I love it hugely. I'm actually very, very active. A lot of my cycling, running stories are on Instagram. And I think that's what you referenced at the beginning of this conversation as well. And also such a visual medium, right? So for me, when I got onto Instagram, it was really because I love photography, and that's where we started from. And now it's actually developed so much more. And that's really the heart of it, right? Expression is at the heart of Instagram. And when you think about expression from a country as vast as ours, as diverse as ours, right? So it's your interest, where you're from, what are you about, and even your own individuality, right? How are you bringing that out to life? I set pictures because I date myself. I'm an old guy, right? Short form video is where it's actually, already gone in a massive way. And you've seen that with the real success in India. And I think for us, there have been many firsts for Instagram in India, specifically around Reels as well. And again, we did work on that last year to kind of bring that out to consumers as well, during the IPL, in terms of, how do you get a much wider body of people to get to understand the joy of actually creating something, right? How do you get them to the joy of creating their own reel, and, what does short form video even mean? So we did work on that as well. And then, of course, when you look at WhatsApp, I think it's probably even deeper than anything I've been saying, right? India kind of,
Yeah.
we move on WhatsApp. In fact, we say it's like water, right? It's part of our existence deeply, and allowing for connecting privately, is at the very, very heart of that platform. We ran a campaign last year, which is It's Between You, just bringing this. And I think the job there for us is, when a brand is that deeply enmeshed, as a marketer, you need to be able to respect that relationship that consumers have with your brand. It's almost like that whole idea of, you don't own it, they own it, because they are so deeply, it's such a deep part of their lives, right? So yeah, I think those are the facets, if you will, from a lens of, what do we mean, or where do we stand? And I think for us, both the beauty, responsibility, and the humility of it is just the scale, and therefore being able to make sure that we are doing justice to it in the work that we do.
You spoke about the More Together campaign that Facebook did towards the end of last year. I wanted to talk to you specifically about the Pooja Didi film. Right, we'll put the links of the film in the show notes for those who've not seen it. But for me, it was one of the most powerful films to have come out in 2020. Right, the film is, of course, about this young girl who's an entrepreneur in Amritsar, and who gives jobs to people who lost employment because of the pandemic, even though she can't really afford them. Right. The film is an emotional roller coaster, but I'm more curious about the connection points that you saw in the reality around you that led you to create this film. Tell us a little bit more about this.
I find 2 points of connection really. One is really about understanding, I talked about understanding your consumer and their milieu, right? And I feel that uh, when we look through what we have lived through and how do you bring about this message of more together, that's on the one side. And on the other, just the inspiration we have found in seeing the actions of people around us on the platform itself. I think those were the connection points for us, which brought us to, to bring out Pooja Didi around Diwali, just to bring that out. And I think for us, the most heartening thing, obviously it was much loved. It traveled massively. You could definitely say that it was viral. But much more than that, to us, the power was that you see the comments and people actually talking about people that they know who are Pooja Didi, who've done that, right? Someone saying, my father, this is exactly what he did, right? His business was struggling, but he was very, very mindful that, listen, there are people that I support. How do I keep them going? How do I manage? And I think there's just something really, really powerful about that, and being able to touch that chord, right? And I think similarly, when we came to this year, and I think the situation that we were in, just the ability of, someone being able to support, and this is kind of, what we're saying in the More Together campaign as well, using the example of Rizwan. And again, I think, of course, it was very powerful. It traveled massively. It did really well. And at the same time, continuing that conversation on social, on who are the Rizwans that you know of, and basically who are the heroes that you see around you, because they come in all shapes and sizes, I think has been very powerful for us to see. And I think that's been really, really meaningful, I would say, to be a part of, and to kind of give that sense of the brand and the power of social media when you think about social media and what it can actually enable. So a true partnership, right? When you say partnership, a true partnership of a team that, you know what you're gunning for, and you share the responsibilities. I think, to me, Pooja Didi is a great example of that. I remember it's not as if our original brief was to say, hey, we want to create a 7-minute film. I don't think anyone goes out and says, hey, we want to make a long film. We were working on something else. And I love the fact that our partners at Taproot, Pallavi and Neeraj, the creative leads, came back and said, this is what we want to do. We have a couple of stories in mind. And that was really the starting point. And then we picked one of those stories up and said, listen, this is powerful. This is great. We should go out and do this. So I think the shared sense of alignment, if you will, right? Not the sense of a client agency conversation, to be honest. And then when Amit came in, the director, he brought such magic to it, especially by housing it in Amritsar. So I mean, when we started the story, the idea was there. I don't think we had necessarily decided where, but when he landed it there, and obviously, just the language, the intonation, it is in Amritsar. Like that's what you feel when you see the film. So even just those nuances, the beauty of the casting. And I also feel deeply about how light your touch should be in terms of just landing, even the significance of the platform there, right? It's very, it's so perfectly done. And it's, I think the really masterful performance, I would say. I remember when I saw the film, I had tears in my eyes and I had nothing to say. Like I was like, this is just gold standard work. Massive credit to the team. My own team
Yeah.
that actually leads this work, who've done a phenomenal job, and then our partners, and the shared sense of oneness in and clarity on what we are doing. That's what leads to great work.
I think all of us had tears in our eyes when we first saw the campaign. But I'm interested when you said how light the touch should be. How did you mean it?
This is more as a marketer, right? That some of those classic issues of, oh, how significant is the brand presence, right? And especially the tropes around that, right? So is it there in the beginning? Is it enough so you can see it? And, I have always been a firm believer that there should never be room for a great campaign or film or work and then for people to struggle to think who it's from, because then it's failing at many levels, right? Fundamentally, is it clear that it's you? And then of course visually or whatever else, but I just feel, because if you think about the film, there's it's not, you don't have a massive presence of Facebook in the film, but it is clearly from Facebook and it has a pivotal presence. That's what I meant by lightness of touch. But that's not the only thing. I feel even in the emotions and what was being brought to life, there was masterful lightness of touch by Amit and the creative team in making sure, and this is always true for work that is emotional, right? It really needs to be just right. If it's a little more, it's too much, then you disconnect from it. How do you actually get that just right? I think that's what I was referring to.
Right. And just building on from what you said, right? As you've been a marketer, building some of the most iconic brands in the world, right? From Coke to Nike to Red Bull, and you've seen this ecosystem, right, of social media, Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp also to a certain extent from the outside, right, as a marketer, right? And now that you're part of the platform, what are some of the things that are visible to you now, if I may ask you that, which was not, when you were a marketer? What are some of the things you realize from the other side?
It's a fascinating question. I think there's some things which are consistent. This is a really deep question, because for me, I think the power of the platforms was very clear from the outside. Right. And I say this, obviously I started marketing long before, social media came into being, right? But yes, especially, I would say, especially from my time in Nike and Red Bull, and both brands that are also, quite out there in terms of how they connect with consumers. I think at both companies, we were deeply involved in working on social media, right? So whether it's from a Facebook lens, whether it's from Instagram, very early. In fact, across the spectrum, really, because at Red Bull, obviously, content was quite at the forefront of the work we did in-house, right? Not just from an external perspective, but even in-house. So I think all of that was definitely visible. I would say what's different, I think the one thing that is for sure is the sheer scale, because the lens from the outside, from a brand, another brand, is really a very tight lens, right? What's my group? What's my audience? What's my following, right? And what are we serving them? And how can we up that game? And how can we make sure the connection is much deeper, right? That's kind of your lens from, let's say, from the outside. I feel that it's much more meaningful. And that's why I always say the word humble as well, because when you have that kind of scale, you really need to be humble. And you really need to think through how can we make an actual positive difference. And I think, to me, that is a massive difference, to be honest, because I wouldn't honestly have thought about that from the outside. There are many examples, right? Because of what we have seen with COVID, what we are able to do as a platform to try and help, just because of the scale of the platform. One, people themselves are finding ways and means to help, which actually is what is our inspiration. And there are many such examples. I know there's one we've celebrated a lot is, this amazing lady called Mahita Nagraj, right? She started Humankind Global. So when the pandemic happened and lockdown happened, there were actually people who thought about, okay, but we are trapped inside. What if there are, old people where, their families in another city? How do they even get their medicines or basics? Because you remember how strict the lockdown was. So, so this lady actually stepped out when all of us were locked in to say, hey, how can I help? And she started a group on Facebook, which actually grew massively to provide help. And I'm just using, that's just one example. There are many, many examples of people really trying to find ways and means to help. And the platforms just play a role in helping to make those connections happen. That's the kind of the power of the community and how we can inspire ourselves from that. And then what can we do? So whether it's around, getting authentic COVID information out, right from the very beginning, right? What can we do? Working with the government, working with, the trusted health organizations in the world to make sure that we can have the right information, because misinformation obviously, is one of the pieces, right? People are confused. They're looking at all kinds of information that's coming to them. So I would say, to me, the biggest standout, honestly, would be the sheer scale and therefore the ability for you to make positive change. I think that's the most standout, to be honest.
Right. I think I understand what you mean when you say scale of that extent. Is also that I was recently speaking to some of the founders who had gone way above their call of duty to create an impact during COVID by organizing themselves, and whether it is oxygen or whether it is creating a chatbot to answer people's questions, sort of making things happen without necessarily waiting for governments to react, which is obviously always going to be difficult in any country. And I always was stunned by the impact they were able to deliver through platforms like WhatsApp, right? I think just as a country, like you rightly said, it's almost like ether, right? It's always there. You can go to the farthest corners of this country and you don't have to explain what you mean by WhatsApp it to me.
Correct.
Right. So it's quite something else. Right? But you mentioned, we were talking about, your time with some of these legendary brands. And I was just reminiscing, as you were talking, some of my most favorite campaigns in this country have happened, when you've been sort of driving those brands forward, right? Right from Thanda Matlab Coca-Cola to probably my most favorite Nike campaign ever, which is Make Every Yard Count.
Oh.
And then, of course, now the fabulous campaign for Facebook itself. I wanted to ask you this. We probably are, I wouldn't say lucky or unlucky, but we are a very unique set of marketers who've seen the world before Facebook, before Twitter, Facebook, etc., and have worked in that market. And then now, where it is almost ubiquitous, right? It is universally the medium that we think first of. So, in the life of a marketing head, in the life of a CMO, what are the things that are 2 or 3 things that are very different today than what they used to be earlier?
Yeah, that's a deep question, Karthik. I think I have to tell you that whenever I'm asked this, and often it's in the context of either the context or the medium, or what changed dramatically. I do always start from the idea that for me as a marketer, and this has been my life, right? I love marketing. Even as we talk about what's changed, I think I also feel very emphatic about what doesn't change. And often there are times we obsess over externalities, but at the heart of what marketing is and what we're trying to do, what doesn't change. And I think I would definitely talk about that as well as coming to change. And I think, and it sounds trite on the surface, but your deep understanding of your consumer. Do you really? And when I say that, I mean 3 clicks down from saying, yes, we run a survey, yes, we have research. It depends, right? Different brands, I work with all of them. We have a consumer track to know what they're saying, to know the sentiment. But really, do you deeply understand your consumer? And do you understand the milieu of where they are, what's going on with them? And does that inform the work that you do? So I do feel there are those facets of the fact that the core at the heart of what it is doesn't really change. Having said that, I think what I will say, what is different now, and basis the context of the things you kind of laid out, I think dealing with uncertainty, right, is definitely, and therefore being nimble, so being able to deal with change, and I know, and we all talk about change, but change from in a very dynamic sense, right? We are dealing with things all the time now. And obviously, the last year and a half has made that very radical for us in many ways, right? Even with our own lives and, mortality and everything else. But just the idea that, if I rewind 10 years or 15 years, and you touched on Thanda Matlab Coke, which is a campaign, I'm so privileged to have been a part of that. And it was 2 years of my life, actually, that campaign on Coke. I would say that, yes, there was, in some senses, you look back and say, hey, that was an easier time, right? Your media choices were quite tight and limited. You didn't have to think across the board. I think I would say today, you need to go much, much wider. But first and foremost is just being nimble and quick and being able to manage things under very quickly changing circumstances, right? So I think that's clearly one part to it, I would say.
If you were to do that campaign today, and I think it was a universally loved campaign, would it be 2 years?
I don't know, and I'll tell you why. Actually, and these kind of hypothetical ones get very difficult, right? Because there was a point in time. In fact, one of the successes of that campaign was that we could do it for 2 years, right? I think to me, I'm just going back in time now. What was incredible about that idea was you often have films that do really, really well, right? You catch the nub of where people's mind is at the right point, and therefore, and also the brand connect that we wanted to get with Coke at the time, just right. And you hit upon something and it does really well. What usually becomes difficult is to follow it up, right? So I think the success of the Thanda campaign was we could keep following it up, and we were bringing out different avatars, of Amir, and, of course, Prasoon was weaving magic with his writing and thinking on that. And Amir, of course, is, like just incredible in terms of what he could do and just his dedication as well. My God, I have just so many stories from that campaign. But yeah, I think...
Tell us one or two. Since we're talking.
Yeah. I think sure. I think, oh my God, there are just really too many stories. But I think we talk, like you look at someone like Amir and, we talk about how he's a perfectionist, but really such an incredible thinking individual and the depth to which they would go. So, okay, let me pick up one. This was when we did the Hyderabadi avatar of Amir in one of the films, where the way it was set up is he chugs like a 200 ml bottle of Coke, and then he says something, Thanda Matlab Coca-Cola, right? As in a rejoinder to this girl. And that take was done 5 or 6 times. And Ashutosh, who's the director, is telling Amir, it's not coming perfectly, right? And by then, our man is probably drunk about a liter, right? So he's like, no, now it's actually physically difficult for me. But I'm just saying, it's just such an incredible dedication to the craft. Or another one where I remember this, we were shooting for what I would call the Nepali avatar. So actually, there's just there's just a lot. I know I keep going on and on the story, but just the point. Okay, maybe the highlight point there is we were in a place that was so cold that we were all wearing our entire wardrobe we had brought to that shoot. It was literally freezing because right on the snow line there, and Amir was in this flimsy coat, right? Like it was not a coat; it was like a cloth thing, and his eyes were stretched out in terms of just giving him the look. And he'd spent the whole day like that, never once complained, never once complained. And, I was in such appreciation of this man's dedication to the craft. This is not about, you think of stars and you think about, hey, how do they act and what do they do? And this is just such incredible dedication. Or even how as a group, and I think that's one of the things I would take out from that campaign, how much and how till the very last minute we would work and recraft. There were times when we were at shoots and in the night, we would still be sitting together to say, hey, maybe this line, maybe let's think about this. And my favorite joke is that sometimes in those conversations, you'd forget who's the brand manager, which was me, right? Who's the director? Because I remember there was an incident where something was, suggested, and I said, oh, this is fabulous. And I remember Ashutosh looking at me and saying, but Avinash, Coke is not coming right in this, right? And for a second, I was like, oh my God, hang on 1 second. What happened to the roles here, right? But that's also my enduring belief on building great teams, where there's a very real shared sense of responsibility, where people have a clear idea, hey, this is what we are going for. and you really get the most incredible output. So yeah, but again, coming back, I think circling back to your point, I think it's difficult to say what that would be today. But what would be fair to say is an idea that powerful would have many different representations of bringing that out. To your point on when we look at the world now, and I think that's the other piece, right? So if one piece was around dealing with a lot of volatility and therefore being nimble, I think the other is probably, I would say, breadth, right? In terms of when you think marketing, I think we lived in an era back then where there was a very clear way of thinking. That is completely out. You can build a brand any and many different ways. And are you open, depending upon your consumer and where they are? So those fundamentals stay, but your way of getting to them now is multifold. And you can do it in very, very unique ways. And therefore, are you really pushing yourself to expand your thinking? I would say a lot more. I think for a practicing marketer today, I would argue that it probably is a whole new course really to think about what does it mean to build a brand. Because I can argue now, sitting where I am, look at creators, right? And look at creators like yourself and what you're doing, right? Building powerful brands of themselves and what they're doing, right? These are all brands as well. So I just feel that, there is a lot more possibly to learn and to open up to. And it changes at a great pace as well, right? So today you feel these platforms and then something else comes in and then something else comes in. How open are you keeping yourself to learning more? I think those are probably the things I would say.
Since we're reminiscing here, I also absolutely have to talk to you about the Nike campaign that you had created many years back. I think it was called Make Every Yard Count. Again, for the uninitiated, we'll share the links on the show notes to these films. This was probably in 2014, I think, and the film was very simple. A fast bowler is bowling a short ball, and the batsman is playing a pull shot, and the ball runs down to square leg from where a fielder is throwing it down to the keeper, who takes the bails off even as the batsman is just diving into his crease, right? Except this was a montage of probably thousands of scenes from people playing cricket in streets and in open playgrounds across the country. I like this campaign especially because it almost had like a flick book effect, and I thought that was very, very powerful, right? I continue to think so. Tell me a bit about how this film came about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it was such an incredible idea, and I also feel it was a great hack. I would say, Karthik, for all of us who were always looking at ways to really do UGC, right? I mean, UGC was a thing we used to all talk about, but I also, in all honesty, will say we also struggled as marketers in UGC because you say, hey, we'll get people to share stuff and then it'll be amazing, and then the reality is actually not a lot of sharing really happens, right? Like you don't really get millions. And I think what was really smartly done for that campaign, and full credit to Senthil and the team at what was JWT then, is to actually, in fact, interestingly, we put it out on Facebook. We actually, to get the input, which is this millions, thousands and thousands of pictures, and just the context for the listeners is, the idea of the campaign was, and our work on Nike in cricket in India always was that the passion of cricket is felt by each and every Indian. In fact, our encapsulation was that the bench strength of the Indian team is 1 billion people. Because that's how we connect with cricket, right? That's how powerful it is for us. I often used to try and explain to our guys in the US at Nike, saying it's very different when we watch cricket than any other sport, right? We are imagining we are hitting that shot, and we are imagining, oh, hey, I would have taken that catch for sure. Right? That's our lived experience of the sport. And how do you bring that to life? And that was the idea of the campaign. How do you bring that passion to life? And the way we chose to do it is to say, okay, we'll ask people to send in pictures, which we'll stitch together. But what we did was we were very purposeful with that. So we were very clear, by the way. If you're a bowler, this is what we want. And it's a short pitch delivery. If you're a batsman, it's the hook shot. So everything was thought through. So it's a hook shot. If you're a fielder, you're throwing here. So the entire play was already thought through. And then to aid people in being able to send it to us, what we also did, and which is what was the beauty, send many photographers. I forget now, I think it was over 100 photographers around the country. And this is, by the way, this is what happened on Facebook, right? So put out a call, and this is exactly my point. That's what the platform is brilliant for, saying, hey, we want to do this. And if you want your shots taken by us, then come to this ground on this date at this time. And so that's how we were able to also get, some degree of consistency, if you will, apart from everything else that people shared with us. And then I think it was really one of the most incredible editing jobs. And in fact, that actually won at Cannes as well, to stitch all of those together into one meaningful film, just bringing to life like the passion of a billion Indians, right? When it comes to cricket, which is what Make Every Hour Count was. Yeah, it was really powerful piece and great example of what is possible. Because before that, we'd also made a really big film, which was Parallel Journeys, which we shot with the Indian team, as well as club cricketers and, what we call gully cricket, people. We put all of that together as well, but that was more of an epic production, with Avinash and team. But then this was just so powerful in really bringing it to life, exactly to your point.
I think back then when I watched it for the first time, and now when I'm thinking of it, it's still goosebump stuff. Mostly because I think metaphorically it sort of connected to what cricket means to this country, right? which is what makes that campaign what it is. Avinash, we usually end the episode by asking our guests what he or she is watching, reading, listening to these days. So, what are you watching, reading, or listening to?
Okay. My world has opened up in terms of watching, and this I was, by the way, reading somewhere as well, that one of the biggest things that's happened, on content is our world has opened up, right? Thanks to the situation we are in. So my mind is being blown by Malayalam cinema over the last 1 week. And by the way, as a person, often people will tell you, oh, you haven't heard of this author yet. You've been missing out in life, or, and I actually always find that as just such a wonderful childlike curiosity, saying that there's a whole world waiting to be discovered. So I saw Malik recently. I was just blown by Fahad Fasil, and I've basically just been watching his movies. So it's literally that, and just waiting for an opportunity to see another movie. But I was also I was just blown by the craft, like everything, right? Like I was like, this is just fabulous cinema. And it's funny, I say this because I think on the same day I tried watching Tufan and failed. So, and this is what happens, right? If you see something really good, and not because I think, no, I'm not saying it's a bad movie. It's just that, it's like, it's a plot you already kind of guessed, right? It's so simple. Yeah. In that sense. And plus, I mean, across cinema in the world, in various languages, we've seen so much of boxing. We kind of know some really great storylines, right? So I think in that sense, I'm reacting to it.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm watching, or maybe even looking forward to watch more of. Sorry, what were your other pieces?
Before I go to the other pieces, if you need a fix for that Tufan experience, there is a Tamil film called Sarpata Parambarai, which is also boxing. But boxing with a period piece, like the way it was popular in the 70s in North Madras and stuff like that. So strongly recommend that. But I was asking you about stuff that you're reading or listening to.
Yeah, so I think listening a lot more in terms of, so podcasts have come into my life in a very big way over the last year or so. And it's interesting that, as a runner, as a cyclist, I don't listen to anything because it's not safe. But as a runner, I haven't listened to music on a run in the longest time. And it's a funny one, by the way, which is that I listen to podcasts on running while running, which is just insane in terms of an inception loop, if you will. Okay, you're
very Nolan-esque.
Yeah. You're listening to ideas on slow running and, math methods. And there's just a lot there. And you're actually doing that as you're running, so you're kind of controlling your heart rate while you're running, and you're reading, and you're listening to someone talk about it. And it's very
That's
meta.
Amazing. Do you sort of apply some of the things you're hearing as you're running as well?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So
I need to try that. Yeah.
That's happened. I also found it that it's really motivating, by the way. So if you're doing the longer runs, where you end up pushing yourself just a little bit more, it's very motivating to listen to people who are so passionate about running, talk about running, right? So you're in the moment, if you will. The other thing I've been really listening to, so as a cyclist, I really follow the Pro Tours. The Tour de France just ended. In fact, I was almost feeling what I can call a sense of loss to say, hey, there won't be something to both to watch, but even more to listen. So Lance Armstrong runs a podcast called We Do or The Move. And I was listening to that every day during the tour, and it was incredible fun. So yeah, I think a lot on running and cycling.
Wonderful.
from a podcast.
Now that you mention it, I'm thinking there should be a podcast on running for running. Like that should be a thing.
I don't think anyone has come up with that yet.
Yeah, like you have headspace for meditation. You need like a running podcast for running, I think. Yeah. Anyway,
with a beat running for you to kind of get your tempo as well, right?
Yep. Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Avinash. It was such a pleasure chatting with you and seeing you after such a long time. Look forward to seeing you in person very soon.
Thanks so much, Karthik. I had great fun talking to you. And yes, it's been a while as well. I'm still adjusting to your new look. It's been awesome.
Thank you. See you.
Thank you.
If you like this podcast, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can listen to us on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcasts.com. You can also follow us on our social media. We are at IVM Podcasts on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to reach out to me, I am _Karthik. That's Karthik with an H on Twitter. And Filter _Koffee. That's coffee with a K on Instagram.
Whether you're an established sports person or a budding one, or simply a sports enthusiast, join us, Tanvi and Shlok.
We are two passionate pro badminton players talking policy, mindset and everything sport.
So tune in to The Millennial Athlete every Monday.
Only on the IVM Podcast Network.
Trust us, it's gonna be lit.
Have you ever wondered where the business world is headed? How the ways in which we create, market and sell to consumers will evolve? Or if we'll ever go back to wearing pants while working? For answers to all of this and more, tune into Advertising is Dead with me, Varun Tugirala. Every Tuesday, as I talk to entrepreneurs, leaders and change makers from across business, media, marketing and beyond. You can catch all episodes of Advertising is Dead on the IVM Podcast website, app or wherever you get your podcast from.